Central Realty. Jill speaking. How can I help you?
Yes, hello, Jill. I've got a problem, a complaint I wish to register. Who should I speak to?
You'll want to speak to Tracy, the residential manager. Just a moment and I'll put you through.
Thanks.
Hello, this is Tracy. I understand your rent is going to be increased.
Yes, this is why I'm calling. I was told that my rent would not be increased for the length of my 6-month contract, which I signed only 4 months ago. What's going on? Is my landlord allowed to do this?
I see. Yes. Okay. That seems strange. Look, can I take down some of your particulars and I'll register a formal complaint to the landlord on your behalf?
Yes, sure, that'd be good.
Firstly, name and address, contact details.
Yes, Jane McSweeney. That's McSweeny. 3 Mauger Street. That's Maugher Street. Windory, 3355.
And the phone there?
Yes, you can contact me on 334756 extension 3176. I generally arrive home by 6 o'clock in the evening, so you can call me around that time, but not after 9. Oh, sorry, 8:30, because that's the time I leave for work.
Okay, so I should note down that the problem is that your landlord wants to raise your rent. And when did you first move in?
Yes, well, the contract began on August 1st, and... oh, hang on. Sorry, that's the ending date. We actually moved in on February the 1st.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 8 to 10.
Okay, good. Now, if need be, you will have to send a letter to the Rental Tenancy Board. But as I said, first let us approach your landlord on your behalf and see if we can work out the problem before it gets to that situation. I'd be very surprised if you have to send a letter. 95% of these kinds of problems get solved early on.
Okay.
Now, if you have any problems you need to discuss, feel free to come in and talk with the general manager. In the meantime, if you would just wait until we receive an answer from your landlord, we'll be able to then plan our next step.
Is there anything else I could be doing?
Well, you could write a letter to the RTB listing all the events as they happened from your point of view. But as I say, hold on to it. Don't send it unless we have to. Well, that's about it for now. Thanks for your call. I'm sure we can sort this out.
Thanks very much for your help. I hope we can sort it out too. Bye for now.
Yes, bye.
That is the end of part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 1. Part 2.
You will hear a woman who works in a theatre talking to 2 new staff members on their first day of work. First, You have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hi, great to see you. I'm Jodie, and I'll be looking after both of you for the first month you're working here at the Amersham Theatre. I'll tell you something about the theatre now, then take you to meet two of the other staff. It's an old building, and it's been modernised several times. In fact, as you can see, we're carrying out a major refurbishment at the moment. The interior has just been repainted, and we're about to start on the exterior of the building. That'll be a big job. The work's running over budget, so we've had to postpone installing an elevator. I hope you're happy running up and down stairs. When the theatre was built, people were generally slimmer and shorter than now, and the seats were very close together. We've replaced them with larger seats, with more legroom. This means fewer seats in total, but we've taken the opportunity to install seats that can easily be moved to create different acting spaces. We've also turned a few storerooms over to other purposes, like using them for meetings. We try hard to involve members of the public in the theatre. One way is by organising backstage tours, so people can be shown round the building and learn how a theatre operates. These are proving very popular. What we're finding is that people want to have lunch or a cup of coffee while they're here. So we're looking into the possibility of opening a cafe in due course. We have a bookshop which specialises in books about drama, and that attracts plenty of customers. Then there are 2 large rooms that will be decorated next month, and they'll be available for hire, for conferences and private functions, such as parties. We're also considering hiring out costumes to amateur drama clubs. Now I want to tell you about our workshops. We recently started a programme of workshops that anyone can join. Eventually, we intend to run courses in acting, but we're waiting until we've got the right people in place as trainers. That's proving more difficult than we'd expected. There's a big demand to learn about the technical side of putting on a production, and our lighting workshop has already started with great success. We're going to start one on sound next month. A number of people have inquired about workshops on makeup, and that's something we're considering for the future. A surprise success is the workshop on making puppets. We happen to have someone working here who does it as a hobby, and she offered to run a workshop. It was so popular, we're now running them every month.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Now, a word about the layout of the building. The auditorium, stage and dressing rooms for the actors are all below ground level. Here on the ground floor, We have most of the rooms that the public doesn't see. The majority are internal, so they have windows in the roof to light them. Standing here in the foyer, you're probably wondering why the box office isn't here, where the public would expect to find it. Well, you might have noticed it on your way in. Although it's part of this building, it's next door, with a separate entrance from the road. For the theatre manager's office, you go across the foyer and through the double doors. Turn right, and it's the room at the end of the corridor, with the door on the left. The lighting box is where the computerized stage lighting is operated, and it's at the back of the building. When you're through the double doors, turn left, turn right at the water cooler, and right again at the end. It's the second room along that corridor. The lighting box has a window into the auditorium, which of course is below us. The artistic director's office is through the double doors, turn right, and it's the first room you come to on the right-hand side. And finally, for the moment, the room where I'll take you next, the relaxation room. So, if you'd like to come with me.
That is the end of part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 2. Part 3.
You will hear 3 students, Ben, Jane, and Tom, having a discussion about their Architecture and Design Studies course. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen to the first part of the conversation and answer questions 21 to 25.
So, Tom, did you manage to get all your reading done?
Yes, Ben, I did. What about you, Jane?
Me too, though it took much longer than I thought it would.
Yeah, some of those dissertations are really long, aren't they?
I'm not looking forward to having to write mine.
Well, that's not till next year.
So, shall we compare thoughts about our reading? Let's start with 20th century architecture. I thought it was pretty impressive.
There was quite a bit of detail.
Yeah, all very relevant. I enjoyed the pictures, the diagrams and photos.
They were quite strange. Not what you'd expect to find in a dissertation, but very helpful.
Whereas sometimes I couldn't really follow the arguments.
Yes, a bit of a mixed bag, really. While modern construction was very serious and thorough, wasn't it?
Indeed. Actually, it was rather dense. I didn't find it particularly easy to read either.
The index was excellent, though, so I used that to guide me around.
I still think it was a bit high level. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to try and cope with it in the first year.
No. That's not who it's aimed at, of course. What about steel, glass and concrete? Not the world's most interesting title, of course.
Again, the index was helpful, though I think we could have done with more photos. There weren't really enough to support what he was saying in places.
Yeah, but what he was saying was easy to follow, wasn't it? He takes you through step by step.
It was hard to believe it had been translated. Seemed very natural.
Actually, it was better written than the next one. the space we make.
But we're supposed to be thinking about architectural ideas, not being literary critics. I like that one.
Really? I just didn't think it covered the whole situation.
It didn't put the question of housing into the context of the time.
You mean how in the 50s economic austerity limited the finances available while a growing population needed housing quickly?
Exactly.
Again, I think you're asking too much of these dissertations.
Perhaps you're right. Well, I did like change and tradition anyway. Very focused.
Yes, although I did think it was oddly arranged in some ways. When you went to the index to track something down, you couldn't necessarily find what you wanted.
I know what you mean. But I have to say, I'd be very proud if I'd written any of these.
True.
And you will next year.
Now you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the conversation and answer questions 26 to 30.
Never mind next year. It's this year that's the problem. I'm never going to get this assignment done.
Yes, you are.
Come on, let's make a plan for you.
Oh, please. I'm just not sure where to go from here. I could look at city plans, study the layout of housing developments.
I think you need a closer focus. The approach to small houses won't necessarily tell you what you want to know. You'd be better to concentrate on large private houses. Study the drawings of those.
OK. Though I don't know how much useful detail I'll be able to get from the kinds of plans that are easily available from that period.
It's true, they can be limited. But what you could do as a next stage is go onto the web. There's loads of useful stuff there.
More detailed plans, you mean?
Well, I was thinking more of illustrations, that kind of thing. Do a search for window designs. I'm sure you'll find some good ones.
I agree. And not just online. See what you do find there, and then, for your next step, check both campus libraries. I think you'll be able to get hold of books which will give you further information. And you need to know more about typical furniture of the time.
This is all very helpful. Thanks, guys. I'm beginning to think I should be able to get something done for Dr. Forbes after all. At least I can see I'll be in a position to tell him the section headings.
Well, a bit more than that would be better. Put your outline plan together and give him that to look at.
Yes. But I'll still need to keep reading, won't I?
Yeah. Once Dr. Forbes has okayed what you've done at that point, you could then go and see Dr. Gray. He's very approachable, and I'm sure he'd be happy to provide you with further references, and then you could take it from there.
That'd be really useful. Well, thanks again. Let me get you both another coffee.
That is the end of part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 3.
Based on Crackles with Rob's website.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer on an environmental studies course discussing how birds are affected by environmental change. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
OK, so we've been looking at how man-made changes in our environment can affect wildlife. Now, I'll discuss a particular example. Let's take a look at mercury. Mercury's one of the 120 or so elements that make up all matter, and it has the symbol Hg. It's a shiny, silvery substance. You may have seen it in old-fashioned thermometers, but it's not used much for domestic purposes now because it's highly toxic. But the problem is that the amount of mercury in the environment's increasing. The main reason for this is the power plants used to produce electricity. The main source of energy that most of them use is still coal, and when it's burned, it releases mercury into the atmosphere. Some of this gets deposited into lakes and rivers, and if it's ingested by a fish, it's not excreted. It stays in the fish's body, and it enters the food chain. So, it's been known for some time that birds which eat fish may be affected. But what wasn't known until quite recently is that those that eat insects can also be affected. So, a woman called Claire Varian Ramos is doing some research on how this is affecting birds. And rather than looking at how many birds are actually killed by mercury poisoning, she's looking for more subtle sub-effects. And these may be to do with the behaviour of the birds, or with the effect of mercury on the way their brain works, so whether it leads to problems with memory, for example. And she's particularly focusing on the effects of mercury on bird song. Now, the process of song learning happens at a particular stage in the bird's development. And what you may not know is that a young bird seems to acquire this skill by listening to the songs produced by its father, rather than by any other bird. And Varian Ramos has already found in her research that if young male birds are exposed to mercury, if they eat food contaminated with mercury, then the songs they produce aren't as complex as those produced by other birds. So, quite low-level exposure to mercury is likely to have an impact on male birds in a natural situation because it can mean that they're less attractive to female birds, and so it can affect their chances of reproduction. Now, the way she's carrying out this research is worth thinking about. She's using a mixture of studies, using birds kept in laboratories and studies carried out outdoors in the wild. The lab-based studies have the advantage that you don't get all the variables you would in a natural setting. So, the experimenter has a much higher level of control, and that means they can be more confident about their results in some ways. And, of course, they don't have to worry about going out and finding the birds in order to observe them. So, what are the implications here for humans? Well, because many birds are migratory, they may be transporting mercury far from contaminated sites. For example, it's been found that ducks who'd been feeding at a contaminated site were later shot by hunters over 1,000 kilometres away, and presumably eaten. But these birds likely had mercury levels high enough to warrant concern for human consumption. In addition, going back to song learning by birds, we saw that this may be affected by mercury contamination. Well, we also know that in humans, mercury causes developmental delays in the acquisition of language. And in fact, this process is very similar in the brain regions it involves, and even the genes that are involved. But mercury contamination has other important implications for humans as well. It's now known that an unborn child can be affected if the food eaten by its mother contains high levels of mercury, and these effects can be quite substantial. In the end, it comes down to whether more value is placed on human economic well-being or environmental well-being. It's true there are new regulations for mercury emissions from power plants, but these will need billions of dollars to implement and increase costs for everyone. Some argue that's too much to pay to protect wildlife. But as we've seen, the issues go beyond that, and I think it's an issue we need to consider very carefully.